The Catholic Church is witnessing a rare public convergence of moral authority from its American hierarchy. 10 days after Pope Leo the XIV's State of the World address, 3 leading U.S. Cardinals, Blase, Cupich, Robert McElroy, and Joseph Tobin, released a joint statement on American foreign policy, asserting that peace, human dignity, and religious liberty must guide the nation's global actions. This move is remarkable not only for its rarity but for its direct invocation of papal guidance, signaling a unified ecclesiastical voice on geopolitical ethics at a moment of heightened international tension. The timing and content immediately establish the statement as a strategic moral intervention rather than routine commentary. The news carries weight because it connects the Vatican's moral framework to urgent real-world policy decisions. The Cardinals explicitly reference ongoing conflicts in Ukraine, Venezuela, and Greenland, situating the Church as an arbiter of ethical judgment in global affairs. By emphasizing renunciation of war as an instrument of narrow national interest, the statement elevates the discussion beyond domestic politics, framing U.S. foreign policy within the broader moral compass outlined by Pope Leo the XIV. The stakes are high. The Church asserts influence over a nation navigating both partisan polarization and the resurgence of militarized diplomacy. This is not a casual statement, it is a strategic signal. The 3 cardinals are among the most influential American prelates, each leading major archdioceses and representing distinct pastoral and intellectual traditions. Their coordinated voice reflects internal consensus and intentional alignment with papal priorities. By invoking the Pope's critique of multilateralism, the statement situates the U.S. within a moral, not merely political, narrative, indicating that Vatican observers are tracking not just policies but the ethical foundations of those decisions. In essence, this statement functions as both a public moral reminder and a subtle diplomatic signal. It underscores the Vatican's concern for human dignity and religious liberty while suggesting that American leaders must reconcile power with conscience. For analysts, the key takeaway is immediate. The Church is actively shaping the framing of global policy debates, demonstrating that even in the modern age, ecclesiastical voices remain capable of influencing statecraft and ethical discourse on the world stage. The statement by Cardinals Cupich, McElroy, and Tobin cannot be separated from their personal and institutional significance. Cardinal Blase Cupich, as Archbishop of Chicago, has consistently emphasized social justice and the ethical dimensions of political engagement. Cardinal Robert McElroy, Archbishop of Washington, brings both diplomatic awareness and a theological lens shaped by international human rights concerns. Cardinal Joseph Tobin, Archbishop of Newark, is known for pastoral sensitivity and global solidarity initiatives. Together, these 3 prelates represent not only the geographic breadth of American Catholicism but also a convergence of intellectual, diplomatic, and pastoral authority, making their coordinated statement a carefully calibrated instrument of influence. Their involvement signals that the Vatican's guidance is being interpreted and reinforced at the highest levels of U.S. Church leadership. The timing of this statement is particularly strategic. 10 days after Pope Leo the XIV's address to the diplomatic corps, the Cardinals' intervention amplifies and operationalizes the Pope's critique of global militarism, weak multilateralism, and threats to human dignity. In a world where geopolitical tensions in Ukraine, Venezuela, and Greenland dominate headlines, their coordinated voice seeks to influence not only public opinion but also policymakers navigating morally contested terrain. The choice to speak collectively, rather than individually, underscores the urgency and unity of their message, signaling that the Church sees current global developments as a pivotal moment requiring a coherent moral stance. Institutionally, this statement reflects the Vatican's dual strategy of moral guidance and subtle diplomacy. The Cardinals are acting as intermediaries between the Pope's abstract exhortations and the practical policy arena of the United States, translating papal principles into actionable ethical frameworks. This also positions the American hierarchy as interlocutors in global church diplomacy, reinforcing the Vatican's interest in shaping foreign policy in ways consistent with Catholic teaching. By aligning their voices publicly, the Cardinals indicate both cohesion and readiness to assert moral influence in secular spaces that are increasingly polarized and ideologically charged. For analysts, understanding who is involved, why now, and under what institutional conditions provides a crucial lens for interpreting subsequent signals. The statement is far from a routine press release, it is a deliberate, strategically timed intervention. Its purpose is not merely advisory but is designed to establish ethical framing for U.S. foreign policy, revealing the Church's intent to remain a central moral actor in shaping global debates, even amid domestic and international turbulence. At its core, the joint statement of Cardinals Cupich, McElroy, and Tobin serves a deliberate strategic purpose to guide the moral compass of U.S. foreign policy in alignment with Vatican principles. By invoking Pope Leo the Fourteenth's recent critique of militarism and the erosion of multilateralism, the Cardinals are not merely offering commentary, they are defining a normative framework. The underlying message is clear. The Church seeks to shape policy decisions through ethical reasoning, emphasizing that respect for human life, religious freedom, and human dignity are not optional but foundational elements of legitimate state action. This move signals that the Vatican expects moral consistency from influential nations, particularly the United States, whose global actions resonate widely. The strategic intent is both internal and external. Internally, it reinforces the cohesion of the American hierarchy around shared ethical priorities, countering polarization within the Church and the broader public discourse. Externally, the statement communicates to political leaders, diplomats, and international observers that the Catholic Church remains a moral arbiter in global affairs. The timing of the statement, following closely on the heels of Pope Leo the Fourteenth's address, ensures that the Vatican's perspective is foregrounded in ongoing debates over war, intervention, and humanitarian responsibility. This positions the Church as both prophetic and pragmatic, translating abstract papal guidance into concrete ethical imperatives for policymakers. Emerging within this strategic intent are subtle signals about the Church's priorities and the nature of its influence. By addressing current conflicts in Ukraine, Venezuela, and Greenland, the Cardinals highlight areas where moral intervention is urgent, indicating the Vatican's attentiveness to geopolitical flashpoints. Their call for just and sustainable peace, renunciation of war as a tool of narrow national interest, and emphasis on humanitarian aid signal an expectation of action consistent with principle, not partisanship. This careful calibration suggests the Vatican is steering discourse, nudging secular authorities toward ethical consistency without directly confronting political structures. In this light, the statement is less reactive and more deliberately projective. It reflects a calculated effort to assert moral authority, shape policy dialogue, and reinforce the Church's role as a global ethical reference point. Observers should recognize that the Vatican is not simply commenting on events but is strategically defining the moral parameters within which states, particularly the United States, are expected to operate. The statement communicates both urgency and direction, signaling that the Church intends to remain influential in high-stakes international decisions. Beneath the surface of the Cardinal statement lies a network of subtle signals, carefully calibrated to convey priorities without overt confrontation. The repeated emphasis on human dignity, religious liberty, and the moral foundation of U.S. foreign policy is not merely rhetorical. Each term serves as a coded signal to policymakers, Church insiders, and international observers. By framing military action as a last resort and tying peace to ethical responsibility rather than power projection, the Cardinals are implicitly critiquing prevailing approaches that prioritize strategic advantage over moral consistency. The language choices, carefully measured, morally charged, yet non-confrontational, signal both authority and prudence, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of how moral influence operates in a polarized environment. Omissions are equally telling. The statement does not single out any administration, party, or leader, even as it addresses pressing geopolitical conflicts. This deliberate avoidance communicates universality. The Church's concern transcends partisan politics. At the same time, the specific mention of Ukraine, Venezuela, and Greenland signals strategic priorities, subtly directing attention toward regions where humanitarian and ethical concerns intersect with geopolitical stakes. By pairing high moral language with concrete examples, the Cardinals embed actionable guidance within a framework of principle, ensuring their message resonates across audiences without generating defensive backlash. Timing is another hidden signal. Issuing the statement just 10 days after Pope Leo the Fourteenth's address underscores alignment and responsiveness. It communicates to both the Vatican and the global community that the American hierarchy is actively translating papal guidance into ethical commentary, reinforcing the perception of cohesion between Rome and Washington. This timing suggests a pattern. Moral interventions are most impactful when closely tethered to papal pronouncements, leveraging momentum and amplifying the perceived urgency of the Pope's broader message. Finally, the collective voice itself, three cardinals speaking as one, signals internal unity and strategic coordination. It implies that moral authority is consolidated and that the U.S. hierarchy is capable of projecting ethical influence collectively. The statement functions as a quiet but unmistakable assertion of Vatican-aligned leadership, signaling to domestic and international audiences alike that the Church's moral perspective is coherent, deliberate, and poised to shape discourse where secular decisions intersect with global conscience. The coordinated statement of Cardinals Cupich, McElroy, and Tobin can be understood more fully by situating it within a historical pattern of U.S. Church engagement in global affairs. Throughout the 20th century, American prelates occasionally issued public interventions on foreign policy during moments of moral crisis, most notably during the Vietnam War and in response to apartheid in South Africa. These past interventions were usually cautious, balancing moral authority with institutional discretion. What distinguishes the current statement is its immediacy, collective voice, and direct alignment with a papal address, demonstrating a more assertive posture that both mirrors and advances earlier precedents while signaling the Vatican's willingness to engage contemporary geopolitical debates more openly. The historical continuity lies in the Church's insistence that moral principles should guide state action. From Pope John XXII's encyclical Pacem in Terris to interventions on nuclear proliferation during the Cold War, there has been a recurring emphasis on peace, human dignity, and the ethical responsibilities of nations with global influence. By echoing Pope Leo the Fourteenth's warnings against militarism and the decline of multilateral dialogue, the American cardinals are extending this lineage of moral engagement, emphasizing continuity in principle while adapting to present circumstances marked by complex conflicts and polarized domestic politics. Yet there is also a subtle deviation from past patterns. Unlike previous instances where statements might have been framed as advisory, the current intervention is prescriptive, explicitly calling for a genuinely moral foreign policy grounded in papal reasoning. This shift reflects an evolution in how Church leaders see their role. No longer confined to general guidance, they are now more willing to articulate concrete ethical expectations for state action, particularly in moments of acute moral ambiguity. The inclusion of specific regions, Ukraine, Venezuela, Greenland, illustrates a targeted and strategic application of this ethical framework, making the statement both principled and practical. Ultimately, the historical lens reveals a Vatican strategy that combines tradition with calculated adaptation. The Cardinals' intervention is a bridge between enduring moral authority and timely, context-driven guidance. It highlights the Church's continued relevance in global ethics, signaling that while tactics may evolve, the enduring objective, ensuring that nations align power with conscience, remains constant. Observers can read this as both a reaffirmation of precedent and an indication of a more proactive, coordinated American hierarchy within the Church's global moral architecture. The joint statement by Cardinals Cupich, McElroy, and Tobin carries immediate and long-term implications for multiple layers of Church governance and global engagement. Within the U.S. Church, it reinforces the moral authority of the episcopate, establishing a shared ethical framework that parishioners, diocesan leaders, and Catholic institutions can reference in evaluating contemporary geopolitical events. By framing war and militarized intervention as a last resort, the statement strengthens the Church's influence in shaping both pastoral teaching and public advocacy, giving clergy and laity a clear, values-driven lens through which to interpret U.S. foreign policy and its ethical ramifications. On a diplomatic and international level, the statement signals that the Vatican's moral voice is active and coordinated in key geopolitical theaters. Nations with significant global influence, particularly the United States, are reminded that ethical principles remain central to the Church's perspective, and that unilateral actions inconsistent with human dignity and religious liberty may provoke moral scrutiny. By naming specific regions, Ukraine, Venezuela, and Greenland, the Cardinals delineate areas where the Church expects heightened ethical awareness and potentially increased humanitarian engagement, creating a subtle but discernible signal to policymakers and international organizations alike. For the faithful, the statement reinforces a vision of global responsibility grounded in Catholic teaching. It emphasizes that moral engagement extends beyond prayer and personal devotion into active participation in shaping a just and humane world. The medium-term consequences may include increased advocacy by Catholic organizations, engagement with humanitarian initiatives, and dialogue with policymakers seeking alignment between national strategies and ethical principles. This amplifies the Church's capacity to influence secular debates on peace, conflict resolution, and human rights, reaffirming its position as a moral interlocutor in global affairs. In sum, the impact of this intervention spans internal Church cohesion, diplomatic signaling, and the ethical formation of the faithful. It positions the American hierarchy as a conduit for Vatican priorities, strengthening the Church's credibility in global policy discussions while emphasizing that moral accountability is non-negotiable. Observers should note that this intervention sets a precedent for future coordinated statements from U.S. Church leaders, reinforcing a model where ethical clarity, strategic timing, and papal alignment converge to shape both perception and policy in high-stakes international matters. Looking ahead, the joint statement of Cardinals Cupich, McElroy, and Tobin signals the Vatican's strategic intent to shape both ongoing and future debates on global morality and U.S. foreign policy. By articulating a framework grounded in human dignity, religious liberty, and the renunciation of war as a normal policy instrument, the American hierarchy lays the groundwork for sustained moral engagement. This is not a one-off intervention. It sets a precedent for proactive guidance, indicating that the Church intends to monitor, comment on, and influence the ethical dimensions of international decision-making in real time. Observers should anticipate similar coordinated statements from influential prelates when geopolitical tensions intersect with questions of conscience and human rights. The next likely steps involve both amplification and institutional follow-through. U.S. bishops' conferences and Catholic advocacy organizations may leverage this statement to engage policymakers, emphasizing humanitarian aid, multilateral cooperation, and the protection of religious freedom in areas of conflict. Internationally, the Vatican may integrate these ethical priorities into diplomatic dialogue with other states, embassies, and multilateral bodies, ensuring that the moral framing advanced by Pope Leo the Fourteenth and echoed by the Cardinals remains central to discussions on war, peace, and global justice. This signals that ethical oversight is becoming an active dimension of Vatican diplomacy, not a secondary consideration. Additionally, analysts should watch for timing and coordination. Future statements are likely to be closely aligned with papal addresses, anniversaries, or emerging crises, amplifying the effect and ensuring cohesion between Rome and local hierarchies. The collective nature of this intervention demonstrates a model the Vatican may replicate, select leaders issuing joint, morally focused statements to project unity, urgency, and strategic influence. Such moves allow the Church to act as both moral conscience and subtle influencer in secular policy, reinforcing its position as an indispensable voice in global ethics. In conclusion, this statement signals a forward-looking Vatican strategy that combines moral authority with tactical precision. It is a call to the faithful, a guide for policymakers, and a blueprint for ongoing Church influence. What to watch next is clear. Coordinated ethical interventions, strategic timing, and careful alignment with papal priorities will increasingly define the Church's engagement with the most pressing global challenges, ensuring that principle, not mere politics, remains the lens through which world affairs are evaluated.